maybe the heading, and so we don't really see a lot of support about where we're going to be going in the future, and that is a bit of a concern. And one of the things that has just been brought up is what is happening in the U.S. with their Inflation Reduction Act, which is basically the U.S. plan to dump a bunch of money into green projects. And our government is saying, oh, well, how are we going to do that same thing? How are we going to match that? Of course, I had just come back from, I was in Birmingham, England in the summer, and with what's called the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. And the major themes, the things that are done there is really talking about food security, energy security, and security in Europe, which of course was the main focus was on Ukraine. And in talking to various governments, they have realized the problem that they've gotten themselves into by depending upon Russia and their energy. So a lot of the green initiatives that seemed so great at the time, they realize that they're going in the wrong direction. Now, that doesn't mean that the governments still don't say that they have to initiate those, but they're busy opening up coal plants. They're looking back to nuclear, which of course, if you're on the greenhouse gases side of things, that shouldn't be an issue, but they wanted to be against anything that created energy. So we're starting to see that. The other thing that we're starting to see in Europe, and this just baffles my mind, is in the Netherlands, where they're taking a look at reassessing the ways in which agriculture is to be presented, and that of course bothers me. And I had heard this months and months ago, where greenhouse operations, they would have three major three operations, and basically decide which one you're going to keep. And so when you want to talk about food security, and that of course is what this major focus was, that was one of those things. And of course the energy security, as I just mentioned, we see the rest of the world coming to its senses, but we aren't quite there yet. And so that is our hope. I mean, as we are the opposition, and so we have been pushing hard to make sure that some of these roadblocks that have been presented are that we're able to change them. And so C69, which deals with a lot of environmental impact assessments for any kinds of projects, we have to deal with that. It's as bad that if you kilometers that you have to go through that, and of course, as we're trying to say that we're going to go into mining and we're all of these kinds of projects, of course, it's all going to be held up by that. And when other countries come to us and say, give us your energy, because we would sooner have the highest quality energy production in the world, we're nowhere on the map. And I think that's the biggest concern that we have. So those are I guess sort of some of the opening remarks that I would have. We are doing our best to be able to rein in some of the actions of the present government. They tend to believe that it's easiest for them to be successful when everybody is at each other's throat, and that's kind of what we see. So they pit one group against another. I remember when I started in 2008, I had gone down into Central America with a parliamentary organization, and it was the Bloc, us, and the Liberals and the NDP. The Liberals were constantly criticizing the Harper government. The NDP were busy, heading off to see some union group somewhere, and it was really us and the Bloc. And at that time, what the Bloc would say is, we love Canada, we love Quebec, two great countries, and what makes one stronger makes the other stronger. At this point in time, their argument is, you guys can't get along. The East is against the West. This group is against another group. You've got energy versus not energy, and so on. Who wants to stay in a country like that? So I mean, they've changed their whole narrative, and so now they're taking advantage of the negative, one group being against another, and I believe it's by design, And so I know I had a chance to speak with some folks earlier, and we see things, and I'll talk about them like smart cities and all of that, and because they have examples of different places in the world where these things have happened, and we just have to make sure that we stop that narrative. And because again, that is designed to pit one group against another. And so meanwhile, you're talking about that, you're not talking about election interference, you're not talking about how are you going to get your energy to market, how are we going to look after those people that are falling through the cracks. So that's what the job of the government is to deal with that. And all of this, the micromanaging that you see is the part where we have been adamant that you have to pay attention to that. Legislatively, Bill C-21, which is the firearms ban, we did a lot of work on that too, and we had a lot of support from people around the country. And finally, I think the Liberals overplayed their hand when they decided that they were going to put an amendment in which made it even more egregious. And what that did, but the only time we seem to get along, is the NDP and the Bloc said, yeah, we don't like that either. And so they that meant that they had to pull back. And eventually, after months, they have done that. However, the poor legislation is still there. It's just that the amendment that they put in isn't part of it. But they have a lot of other turmoil going on. The question as to when they might bring that back, I'm not sure. No matter what, it still would have to go through the Senate process. And the folks that we have been talking to in the Senate are not any more excited about it than we are. They do have ways in which they can slow that type of legislation down. So that's kind of part of it. Very unlikely that will be dealt with during the spring session. It seems as though right now, whenever the government gets a hold of a microphone, they want to keep talking, so that they don't have to deal with other issues that are pertinent. And so that means that a lot of their legislation will be slowed down as well, because it has to go through the committee process, when they have bills, in order to make that happen. So that's one aspect of it. C11 is the Online Streaming Act. Again, we've been fighting on the side of experts and content creators, and of course, they've been able to find different groups in different pockets and say, well, that probably wouldn't hurt us that much, and so on. But that hasn't been what we've heard from most people. And of course, we have experts in the field that have indicated that this is way too much overreach, and it's again something that we should be doing what we can to make sure that the content that we see and the content that people are able to put on is as free of government bias as at all possible. So that's part of it. Just something municipally that might have some significance. I don't know whether this will filter down to where you are, but on the energy or in natural resources, we have just looked at a Senate bill, which is called S222, which has the use of wood, and it's primarily use of wooden structures as far as the federal buildings are concerned. And really there's a height restriction. I think it's 6 stories that you can use, but there have been a few buildings in BC that have gone up to 12. And I think what they're trying to do is to say, hey, well, why don't we use more wood in these structures? So, the emphasis that they have is so that you could deal with greenhouse gases and so on. So that's, as long as you mention that, then that makes them happy. But when we were talking with firefighters unions and firefighters from around the country, there was 2 things they were concerned about. First of all, the kinds of toxins that were there, and when they go into a structure fire, how to deal with that. But secondly is the whole concept of if you're doing this in concert with everybody gets to have an electric vehicle, and you have various charging stations and so on. Their concern is how you would manage that. And the fires that come through batteries are a lot different than ordinary car fires that one would have. And so that was something that was brought up. This will pass. I mean, we just were able to get those comments from firefighters. It doesn't affect the legislation, but it simply became something that the expectation is that the department will really push on codes, building codes. And of course, anytime a federal government deals with building codes, they're going to take it to the provincial people, and then they're going to download it to you. And so you'll just have to be aware of it. But that'll, it's down the road. Because it was a Senate bill, it was passed there. It's now going through our group, and probably in the next month it would be voted on, and then it would receive royal assent. But it's just one of those kind of things with a private member's bill. And I've had private members' bills. I know people used to argue, well, I'll put in 5 different private members' bills, and I'll make all these changes. And the reality is, you get one. It's best to wait until the next redraw, because I was able to present a private member's bill many years ago, which actually changed the Criminal Code of Canada, and that had to do with the impersonation of a police officer in the commission of an offence. What we did there was we introduced aggravated courts to be able to look at, and I suppose maybe one of the proudest things that I can look at that I have accomplished over that time is that you start to see that now in any other legislations, whether it be on elder abuse, whether it's issues with protection of healthcare workers, or anything that is dealt with that really becomes the go-to part. And Stephen Harper was great at allowing backbenchers to be able to look at issues, and this issue came to my desk in Red Deer with a young girl that had been kidnapped and assaulted because she thought that it was a police officer, and it's the same as like using a gun in an offense. So you disarm somebody, right? So that was the reason. And having sat with her and her mother to talk about this is what we came up with. So private member bills are important. They're not, but just as I mentioned before, it's kind of a where are you in the pecking order, and secondly, how do you really find something that is important to your constituents? So hopefully there are others like that. I guess I don't have a lot of other particular issues, and I had indicated to Your Worship that I would take questions. Your council had some, and I would look at that. Again, before I leave from there, some of the programs and funds that the federal government, and the federal government is not the executive branch. Well, they have developed many programs, most of which have to do with, if you want money, make sure you talk very politely about their green initiatives. And so there's, Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, of course. Well, we're all kind of tied into that. And they had to change the name because it was ours, but it's the gas tax refund. So it has a different name now, but you still get to cash those checks, so that's a good thing for your community. The Disaster Mitigation Adaptation Fund, that again is if you put money into things that are going to help as far as the environment is concerned, they're happy to deal with that. One of the other things, and I talked to somebody earlier, the Smart Cities Challenge, which of course is another one of those things that quite frankly seems to be pitting one group against another, and so that's certainly we are against it. With CSIS has had recent warnings about it, and so on. It's, for what reason does government need to know that much about us? And so that's the key thing. So with that, it was in computing science, and I went into teaching after a while because I couldn't type very well. It was sort of 2 fingers. Now I do it with 2 thumbs, but at that time it was 2 fingers. And so I just So I told Bill Gates when he came, well, I opened up this spot for you now, so you'll be good. But the point I want to make is computers can do amazing things, but looking at individuals in any way, shape, or form encourage. And it makes life easier for bureaucrats. It makes life easier, but knowing what streets need to have their potholes fixed and that sort of thing. How you get your information for that is better than anybody else. So that's the key part. But others, so through FCM, Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and again, I meet people from my riding and from Alberta that are there. Really, the kinds of monies that they're talking about, like the Green Municipal Fund, which supports capital projects that are. I love the environment, but I look at the air, the water, and the plant food, and suggest that's a major concern. But greenhouse gas emissions are something that they are concerned about. Municipalities for Climate Innovation Program, another part. The Municipal Asset Management Program, and again, that's something that helps in training and so on. And then renewed focus on systems. They're taking a look at what the U.S., as I mentioned before, is doing in the Inflation Reduction Act, and they're saying, well, how are we going to compete? And I don't know what the numbers are because nobody wants to talk about them, but Volkswagen has just had a major battery plant that has gone into eastern Canada. You hear lots too hung up with some of the things that I read about these things, but nevertheless, we have to get to the bottom of it, and that's again my role back in public accounts is make sure that you know where the money is really spent and what the rationale is for each of those things. So that's part of it. I know that in the past there's been a discussion with regards to the RCMP back pay, and because at the present time. And you folks have asked me about this before. You're kind of on the hook for that, but we've talked to the department several times looking. It seems as though they're not really pushing to get that payback right away, but it's still a question mark on your balance sheet. Okay, so that's something continue to ask. We'll continue to do what we can to make sure that that's addressed. I know that it's costly to a community, and I think that's something that you really want to consider. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. I love to talk about the things that the places where I get to go and things that I get to do. But certainly, if you have any other questions, I'd be pleased to address them.
Councilor Bazak has a question.
Thank you, Mayor, and good to see you, Mr. Dreeshen. And I have a question for you. With all due respect, the Liberals have decided to raise the salaries of MPs, and I guess the issue I have with that is, could I get a commitment from you to advocate for retirees? These people have been, for the last 6-7 years, or prior to that, they're trying to carve out a living. They're paid away at $600, $660 a month or something like that. I think it's unreasonable that they should be, since they built this country, they should be favored a little better. And I would like a commitment from you that you will advocate or lobby for the seniors in our community.
Yeah. Well, and I'll deal with both aspects of that. First of all, it was the Liberals. However, it was back in Chrétien's time when they decided how MP salaries were going to be determined. As far as it personally is concerned, I've simply committed that the raises that I get go to charity. And I didn't get into this job for the money. And so that's the rationale that I have. And there's a lot of everyone say, oh, well, you got to tell us what it is. Well, no, I don't. But I mean, I look at youth programs, and I look at certain health conditions and so on. I spent a fair amount of time as a hospital board chairman back in the 80s and 90s, and so a lot of things that are meaningful to me there, and so I deal with that. And as far as the relationship, as far as seniors are concerned, these, we're going to give you $500 more bucks. Well, I mean, if they have to renegotiate a mortgage, that will be taken up in the first month. So I certainly advocate for making sure that we deal with that. But at the same time, what we have to do is to get inflation under control, and we do that by making sure that the dollars that all of you and everyone that is here sends are spent wisely, and I mean, if all the CERB money that went out that based on a decision that they're going to shut this down and that down, well, therefore they had to come back with money, and then of course to suggest that, well, we've lost a few billion here, but we don't really know where it's at, but doesn't, if we can't find it, so what? Well, that came out of everybody's pocket, and it also added to the inflationary stresses that we have. So, we have to control both, and certainly our seniors and people that have done so much, I think it's important that we look at that. So, absolutely, thank you, John.
Any questions?
You can, anything you want to say.
Yeah, I know we talked a bit about the changes to the boundaries of our rights.
Absolutely.
In that consultation process, and I know we got
Preliminary changes, and they came out in the fall. What they did here in central Alberta was like a dog's breakfast. I mean, it was awful. So what they managed to do, and this is based on input that we had from municipalities and from businesses and different organizations, they at least set up central Alberta, if you would, as by keeping, for example, keeping Bowden and Olds together, right? So that was important to kind of bring this continuity together. They cut it off at Highway 22. So that's going to be in a west, basically in Jasper, which is a beautiful place to be, but a little tricky to be able to, to represent. But it's like the new name or the present name. These things can change. Didsbury, so you definitely get about you. But most of the businesses, most of the, we're into, it's agriculture, it's ranching, oil and gas, many of those things are all kind of the same, and I think that's a big advantage there. But the Red Deer riding, it started in 1908, and it was everything between Calgary and the metropolis of Strathcona.